Test 1, 2.
Ready to go, fellas? Sweet. I'll turn the music down. We're going.
Good evening, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Sushmita, and I would like to welcome everyone to Gangalan College. And thank you so much for joining us with our Senator David Pocock's Gangalan Town Hall. It's always good to hear from the community. So before we begin, just a quick go through of all the housekeeping rules. So we have about 4 fire exits here, and we have the emergency exits, and we have the toilet right up the left, my left, out there. And just out of courtesy, it will be great if everyone can make sure that their phones are on silent. So thank you. And before we begin with our day, I would like to request everyone to join me today for a moment of silence for Pradyut and Pranav Vivekanandan and the unfortunate tragedy that has befallen our community in the just a few days ago. Thank you. So I would just like to mention that this visual that happened on Sunday was just not the only one in the recent past. Here in Canberra, we also have a tribute to the 15-year-old Western Australian boy, Cassius Turvey, and we send our ongoing love and support to his family. So this is the third and final town hall of the year that David is holding. And the town hall has been a fantastic way to connect with the community and just hear your thoughts and concerns. So the town hall will kick off fresh next year in February in Belconnen, so everyone stay tuned. So moving on with today, as you all know, the main purpose of these town halls is so that David can directly hear from you. And today, David is keen on updating you all with a lot of things happening in Parliament and talk about some big votes coming up in Senate. And we also have a special speaker tonight regarding that, and that's the Honorable Tony Burke, Minister of Employment and Workplace Relations. He's here to join us to talk about the government's industrial relations reforms. So before we start off the day, I would like to introduce another really well-known VIP, Uncle Richie Allen, the proud Nanaval and Kimileroy custodian, who is an extraordinary local artist. And he's dedicated in providing and managing safe workplaces, cultural awareness, and education for the Aboriginal people to thrive on. Uncle Richie, I'd please like you to come on stage and share a few words.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those kind words. I really don't have to talk myself up now, which is great. But yeah, always wanted to perform Welcome the Country. And, sometimes, what is a welcome to country? It's an ancient ceremony that was performed before you entered anyone else's country. You stopped. You were smoked and ensured your cultural safety, and your footprints weren't left on other people's country. Australia is built on 500 different Aboriginal countries throughout Australia, each with its own laws, customs, and language. Often we don't look at those laws, customs, and language. And as I stand here today, for this land and the Ngunnawal people, I pay my respects to the ancestors. Their footprints that they're left on this amazing country, we live, work, and walk upon each day. Often those footprints get built upon, get covered over. Now, it's important we highlight those footprints and look for those footprints, because it is the oldest continuing footprints in the world, not just Australia, in the world. And if you call yourself an Australian, these footprints are part of your history and a part of, the future generations' history. Now, I sit here speaking English, and if I asked everyone here today, if you can tell me in over the 500 different Aboriginal languages, raise your hand if you even know to say hello in one. Raise your hand. I could say, like I said, if there's 100 people here, there's about 10 of us that actually know. And for me, that's sad. For Australia, that's sad. Because we all should know how to speak a First Nations language, because it's part of you. It's part of, the journey that we're on with Australia, that journey called reconciliation. What our elders do, and I pay respects to the elders, past, present, and like myself, that are the next generation of elders. You cannot get true reconciliation unless you make it a priority. We cannot move forward as a country until reconciliation is real. And part of that is learning the 500 different Aboriginal cultures here in Australia. In the cultural world, we made the Western world a priority to learn the Western world. And right now, we extend that to be reciprocated. Make it a priority. In Ngunnawal country here, learn about the Ngunnawal people. Again, we build upon Ngunnawal country, but often we don't see what's there. And I invite you all to humbug Dave to come out and see Ngunnawal country, to embed it in your everyday lives, because that's how we will get on a shared journey. That's how we'll get true reconciliation and understand what Australia really means. At the moment, it's not fair. It's not true. It's not real. I invite you to come and see the real world, the real Australia, through our eyes, hear it through our ears. Let's walk together, side by side, not in front and not behind. I also pay respects to the other cultures as well, and extend that respect to Dave and Emma. And thanks for humbugging me always to come and do this stuff. For that, how could you say no to Dave? For that, he's Dave. That. On behalf of the Ngunnawal people, Yan Yed Yagu, Nanadara, Yamalandi, Nanadara. Hello and good evening from the Ngunnawal people, and welcome to Ngunnawal country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uncle Richie. So for the past few weeks, David has been inviting all the Canberrans to submit their questions on Slido. The timing was perfect. So while you can't submit any new questions now, you could definitely ask any questions from the floor, or you could just upvote the existing questions. So just make sure that you scan the QR code, or you could just go to slido.com and put in the code Pocock22, which is also on screen. So there will also be an opportunity to just join in conversation and submit any questions that we probably don't get to answer after the formal proceedings close. Just make sure that you find one of the staff members wearing the Pocock t-shirts, who are all over the place. So now I would like to invite Senator David Pocock onto the stage to share a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushmitha. Thank you so much for emceeing tonight. Thank you all for coming out on a Wednesday night. Thank you to Uncle Richie for that heartfelt welcome. It is a real honor to live on Ngunnawal country, and I pay my respects to you and to Ngunnawal elders, past and present. And hopefully over the next year or two, we can further that conversation around recognition and reconciliation. I've really loved the last 6 months. It's been a huge learning curve, but such a privilege to represent a community that I love. And I really appreciate everyone who has stayed involved, who's turned up like you are, who's been in touch with the electorate office who's been pushing us on issues, raising other issues, some of which have resulted in amendments to legislation and some really good wins. So I thought tonight, obviously, IR is what's on a lot of people's minds, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a rundown on what we've been up to and a bit of an update, and then we will get to some questions. Firstly, just a quick poll, something we've been talking about in the office, Elon Musk buying Twitter. Just interested, how many people in here use social media? Most people. How many people would use it daily? How many people would be concerned about social media's effect on society? Keep your hand up if you're concerned about its effect on our democracy. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. That's a bit of live research, something we've been sort of thinking and talking about. So really good to see that. If anyone's gone past the electorate office, you'd see we have new signs up finally. So we're between Pizza Capers and KFC and Pizza Hut and Macca's, if you want to find us, and stop in. And we're really trying to make our electorate office a sort of hub for the community. So one of the things that will be starting from December going forward is, I want to get this right, it's the second Friday of every month. We'll have a Justice of the Peace, Christine Brill, in there if you do need something signed or verified. I know it's sometimes a real hack to find a Justice of the Peace, so that's another thing that'll be happening down there. Since the last town hall, a lot has been happening. We had the federal budget handed down. It was great to see a lot of election promises being funded. Clearly, in the ACT, there's a long way to go. We have to continue to push the government to ensure that the ACT is getting its fair share. Last week was my first Senate estimates, which was a lot of fun. Total madness as an independent, trying to run between 4 committees, asked a lot of questions about projects relating to the ACT and other areas that are of interest to people here and that had been raised with us. One of the interesting things that Rory and my team had found this line in the budget to an agency, the Australian National Preventative Health Agency, which has done nothing since Tony Abbott stopped it in 2014, but is still there, still being audited every year by the ANAO, and has $12 million locked up in it. So it was a real utopia moment, sort of asking officials about this zombie agency, which will hopefully be scrapped when the new CDC gets legislated at some point. There's been a lot of legislation in the Senate. It was the Registered Nurses in Aged Care 24/7 bill that went through, the new paid family and domestic violence leave. And on that one, a really big thank you and shout out to everyone who worked on that for so long. I held a roundtable at the ANU with experts and community leaders and frontline workers across the ACT to hear about the bill. And yeah, I'm just constantly blown away by the number of people in that community doing such great work. It's clearly an area we need to continue to focus on and resource. We moved an amendment to Jobs and Skills Australia to ensure that universities were recognised in their work. It was the intention, but it wasn't explicitly mentioned in there. And one of the, I think, really cool things, there was a PBS general co-payment bill, and we managed to push the government to address some of the issues around opiate dependence. At the moment, a lot of the opiate dependence drugs aren't included in the PBS, so it's cheaper for people to be addicted to prescription opioids than to get off them. And the government's committed to dealing with that within, I think, the next six months by mid next year. So I think that's a good little win. And clearly, there's a lot coming up in this next 2 weeks. There's the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the NAC, which you would have seen a bit about, and which was a massive election issue. Helen Haynes handed the committee report to the Lower House last week, and broad support for it, broad political support for a National Anti-Corruption Commission, which is great for Australia. Helen Haynes, my friend and I have offered constructive recommendations on how to improve the legislation. I won't bore you with all the details. We included some in the newsletter, I think, but the main one is around public hearings. The government have included a clause that only in exceptional circumstances, myself, Helen, and many of the experts in that space are saying that it should be up to the Commission to decide. So we'll keep pushing them on that. There's an EV bill coming up. This is designed mainly for fleet vehicles. So it's a refund on fringe benefits tax. Plug-in hybrids have been included. I'm arguing that I don't think the taxpayer should be subsidizing plug-in hybrids to the tune of $1 billion over the next decade. That $1 billion could be going into charging infrastructure and other things. We absolutely want to create a second-hand EV market soon, and this is an important way to do that, but I don't think plug-in hybrids are the way to go. Obviously got the territory rights bill sitting there. It's been debated a lot in the Senate. I think we're nearing the end of the speakers list, I hope, and have a firm commitment from the government to get that done in the next 2 weeks. So that'll be great to get that done. One of the big things that I'll continue to push the government on and hasn't happened is raising the rate of job seeker. You know, here in the ACT, there's tens of thousands of people living in poverty across Australia. 1 in 6 children are now growing up in poverty. For a wealthy country like Australia, I simply don't accept that we can't afford that. This is about priorities. At the same time that we are told we can't afford that, we're still giving billions of dollars of subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, who seem to be doing pretty well for themselves at the moment. That brings me to the Industrial Relations Omnibus Bill, which is clearly the hottest topic on the Hill at the moment, hottest topic in Canberra, and is being talked about around Australia. I'm obviously really keen to hear your thoughts. I'll answer as many questions as I can. And given how important this bill is, it's the biggest changes we've seen since the Fair Work Commission was legislated. And fortunate enough to have the Education and Employment Minister Tony Burke here to say a few words and answer some questions. So thanks very much for coming here tonight, Tony. And I asked earlier about social media. I guess one of the things I'm realizing is that it is a real challenge to have nuance and to talk about details in our current media landscape and social media world. A lot of that gets lost. So the thing I want to say to people here is that the vast majority, 85–90% of this bill, I support. We absolutely have to get wages moving for workers. And there's a bunch of measures in this bill that if they were in the Senate on Monday, I would vote for them. It's the last details that I'm concerned about, and I'm really committed to getting right. And I've been having some really constructive discussions with Minister Burke and his team. Over the last few months, I've met with, I think, almost every union now, businesses across Canberra, employee organisations. I've attended a lot of the Senate committee public hearings, and me and my team are currently making our way through the 66 submissions to the Senate committee hearing. Were they just up while I was talking? Anyway, there were some details I'm showing the timeline. That has been one of my big concerns. It's been a short timeline to get across a bill of this size. And having said that, my team and I have been spending a lot of time doing just that, and we'll continue to do that. So yeah, obviously the objective is to get wages moving. Anyway, I think you've had a look at them. So yeah, the number of workers on enterprise agreements has been going down. Aim of this bill is to allow workers to bargain collectively, and there historically there has been a gap in wage increases for those on enterprise agreements. Recently, that has really narrowed up. There's a lot in this bill, from our calculation, 23 different measures. As I said, a lot of it great. Some of it that we're going to continue to work on the detail. And so with that in mind, I'll hand over to Minister Burke to say a few words. Thank you.
First of all, thanks so much to Uncle Richie for welcoming us to Ngunnawal land and acknowledge elders past and present. I think we often forget what a generous thing a welcome to country is. There's lots of reasons that people might want to say a whole lot of other words, and to say welcome, it's an incredible act of generosity, and I don't think we take it lightly. To Senator Pocock, thanks for the opportunity to be able to be part of the conversation tonight. And so I think what I'll do, I'll go briefly through the 80% that Senator Pocock's described, and then I'll try to give a bit of an explanation of some of the areas that might be considered the harder, more controversial parts. I think that's probably the best way to do it. In terms of the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill, there are three sorts of provisions in it, and they're trying to deal with three key problems. We do have a job security problem in Australia. Secure jobs are much harder to find than they used to be. And a whole lot of areas that used to be the key hold of secure work, particularly like take areas like the finance industry, have now become havens for insecure work. The second problem we're trying to deal with is the gender pay gap. Gender pay gap is at 14%. No matter what level, as long as there's a gap, it's unacceptable, but 14% is extraordinary. And without legislating some changes, we're not going to be able to deal with that. And the final area is to get wages moving. There are sort of two key mechanisms used to get wages moving. There's the official processes of the Fair Work Commission. We've already used those. That's what we used with the annual wage review, which ended up with the 5.2% wage increase for the minimum wage, and similarly ended up with the pay increase, which we've gone through the first part of the announcements there from the Commission for Aged Care Workers. But to go the next stage of getting wages moving, we need to talk about bargaining. And so they're the three sorts of issues. If I go first of all through the job security issues, we make job security an objective of the Act. That then affects a whole lot of small decisions that are made. We also, in terms of job security, put in a rule against these consecutive contracts that people can be on, where you've technically got a permanent job, but you've got it for 12 months, and then after 12 months, you get another 12-month contract, and after another 12, you get another 12-month contract. We get people now who should be qualifying for long service leave and are effectively still on their probationary period. That's not secure work. So we've got a provision where once you've gone for more than 2 years, or you've gone beyond your second contract, the contract you're on is valid, the closing date's not. You're just on it as a continuous employee, which makes a huge difference for a lot of people with job security. And the third thing with job security we're doing in the bill is giving people a power. If an employer acts unreasonably in refusing flexible work, the classic example with this will be someone will get a roster change. And as a result of the roster change, it means there is no one to pick up their 3-year-old. Now, at the moment, you have a right to request saying, hang on, I can't work that roster. But if the employer just says, nope, tough luck, that's the end of it. You've got no right to appeal. By having a right to appeal to the Fair Work Commission, most people won't appeal. What will happen is, for the small number of employers, and it's largely junior managers in bigger businesses where we have problems with this, if they know there's a consequence, they'll act more responsibly in the first place. And effectively, if the only way to keep your job is to abandon caring commitments that you have, a whole lot of people effectively don't have security at work. So they're the job security measures, top line. The pay equity measures, first of all, gender equality will also become an objective of the Fair Work Act. Secondly, we will abolish pay secrecy clauses. They've been used in a whole lot of workplaces to make sure that various women employees are paid less than men, but they can't find out about it. It'll be a situation where it'll be up to you. If you want to disclose how much you're paid, you'll have that right, and pay secrecy clauses won't be able to prevent you from doing that. We'll get rid of the rule at the moment that in a pay equity case, you have to establish a male comparator. Sounds technical, but here's what it's meant. It's meant when early childhood educators tried to get themselves a pay equity case up to get pay increases, they had to try to prove that their work was the same as engineers. Now, it was an impossible hurdle. It's why the pay equity case failed. You shouldn't have to find a male comparator to be able to establish that feminised industries are doing work of greater value than what pay currently recognises. And the final thing that we'll be doing in this bill is establishing a couple of panels, a pay equity panel and a care and community sector panel within the Fair Work Commission to make sure that it has the expertise to be able to deal with these issues. But the more controversial part, and I'll deal with this in the most detail, is the changes to bargaining. Now, we've had wages numbers come out today, which means we're now up to 3.1% in terms of the annual wage earnings for Australians improving on the wage price index. So with inflation running at 7.3, expected to get to 8%, people are still going backwards and are going backwards fast. Even at 3.1%, that's still lower than before than what inflation was at before it started to spike. It was running at 3.5. So we've been told for a long time that wages will take care of themselves. They won't. We were told low unemployment would deliver wage improvements. It didn't. We were told productivity growth would deliver wage improvements. It didn't. One of the key ways to be able to get wages moving is to be able to get bargaining working again. And Senator Pocock, when he showed that graph about what's happening with enterprise agreements and bargaining, we're now down to only 14% of the Australian workforce being on enterprise agreements. Now, that's too low, 14%, because these agreements are the key way that you can get an improvement in pay for workers and at the same time get flexibility and productivity benefits for the employer. It's a classic example of getting good outcomes, but it only works if we get bargaining working. We took this problem to the Jobs and Skills Summit, and the Jobs and Skills Summit came out with two ways of dealing with it. One was to update the Better Off Overall test, and the other was to introduce multi-employer bargaining. The update of the Better Off Overall test is meant to work this way. Effectively, the test itself remains as it is. But if you find somebody has fallen outside of it, you find either at the time or later that there actually were some workers who were going to be worse off. Instead of blowing up the whole agreement and saying, okay, now there's no agreement at all, the Commission will have the power to fix it for those workers. Now, there's some further amendments that probably will need to be made following the Senate inquiry, because there's an argument that's been made that we're now working through that some people might still slip through the cracks on this. But the principle that we're determined to get to there is that the Better Off Overall test will still make sure that no worker can be worse off, but can be dealt with in a way that we're not constantly blowing up agreements completely. The most controversial part is how we deal with multi-employer bargaining. Now, I really want to thank Senator Pocock for the calm, like the number of meetings that we've had, number of conversations we've had on the phone, and they've just been working through issues. It's calm, it's responsible, and it's, yeah, I've seen some of the media articles about sort of games of ant between the two of us, and it couldn't be further from the truth in terms of the decent and professional conversations we've been having. So I respect for what I'm about to describe, that I haven't persuaded Senator Pocock that we're ready with this yet. But let me explain why we want to do what will be in front of the Senate when the Senate returns. We're not creating anything completely new. Multi-employer bargaining already exists within the Fair Work Act, but there's so much red tape around it, people have basically given up. The low paid stream that was meant to help a whole lot of people on low wages has only been used 4 times, and since 2014, no one's even tried because you just couldn't get into it. So what we're doing with the different streams that already exist is we're modifying them to make them workable again. So some people have said, oh, this is all too complex. Every change makes it simpler than what's there right now. Every change makes it simpler. So the low paid stream effectively will allow largely feminised industries where workers are being paid really close to the lower awards, a system where you're not particularly industrially strong. They're not sectors that have been prone to large amounts of industrial action, and a much more active role for the Commission in being able to help get bargaining moving for those industries. For small business, there's effectively a cooperative stream where it is possible that they'll be in the form of, let's call them model agreements, that small businesses and their workforces can say, yep, that one works for us, and they vote to be part of it, as a really simple agreement making form for small business that's largely been cut out of agreement making, because if you don't have an HR department, doing all this on your own, it's just too complex. So to have a simple process will be there for small business. But then we have the single interest stream, and I think this is the one where we need to have the biggest conversation. The single interest stream goes beyond people on the lowest wages. The single interest stream starts with the principle where which employers want to bargain together or which groups of workers want to bargain together. That's the starting point. And some of the different examples I've seen out in the media are groups of employers or groups of workers that would never choose to bargain together anyway. But the starting point is they have to want to bargain together. Either the employers choose to or the workforce chooses to by a majority vote. Once they've chosen to, the Commission has to have a look at it and say, hang on, is this a reasonable group? And they apply a couple of tests. One's called the common interest test, the other's called the public interest test. Now, some people and some of the lobbyists are saying, oh, can you add a whole lot of conditions to these tests to make it really clear who's in, who's out, how it works? I'm very wary of doing that. I'm very wary of doing that because that's exactly how we ran into the problem that's in the Act at the moment. There were so many rules, there was so much red tape that we ended up with something that had lovely pages on the statute book and helped no one. So where the Commission looks at the public interest test and thinks, okay, if they don't think there's enough detail in the Act, where do they look? They go back to the objectives. And the objectives of the Act include all the principles that I think we'd want. The objectives of the Act already say, you have to take into account here work-life balance. You have to take into account here there being a fair safety net. You have to take into account productivity, the needs of the economy, and the difference for small and medium-sized businesses. All of that's already within the objects of the Act, and it would be referred to for both the common interest test and the public interest test. That's already there. So that's effectively the technicalities of the process. But let me just picture for you, who are the workers who this would affect? First of all, it won't be required for the people on the absolute lowest wages. But I start with the principle that the people on the lowest wages aren't the only people who we need to get wages moving for. People on middle incomes are also facing some pretty tough measures at the moment with what's happening with rents, with what's happening with mortgages, with what's happening with inflation. And I don't want to leave people on middle incomes out of the conversation about getting wages moving. The single interest stream is their only way in if their employer won't engage in single enterprise bargaining. It's their only other way in. And it also is the one stream that's about stopping the race to the bottom. Now, some people have proposed, oh, can't you make this stream just when businesses work cooperatively, not when they work competitively? I want it to be available for businesses that work competitively, and for this reason. I want businesses to engage in all sorts of competition. I want them to compete on quality of service, on the way they do things. I want them to be able to compete with each other on their brand, on the systems that they offer. I don't want them to be competing on a race to the bottom on wages. I don't want that. By allowing businesses to bargain together, you create a way of basically where there's an industry standard being established, making sure that's not constantly being undercut. Let me give a simple example. The air conditioning systems that you'll find in buildings like this are put together by sheet metal workers. Those sheet metal workers, there is an industry standard wage that is well above the award, and it's what all the major providers pay. But they are constantly at risk of new competitors coming in and simply undercutting on wages and nothing else. And there's a pattern when rogue businesses come through. The ones that cut corners on wages usually cut corners on safety and other areas as well. So what multi-employer bargaining would allow, and the employers in this industry and the workforce have been wanting to be able to do this, to have a multi-employer agreement where if a new competitor tries to undercut purely on wages, their workforce gets to vote on whether they want to be on the same wages as everybody else. And in doing that, we stop the race to the bottom. Similarly, you'll get an example with cleaners. You'll get a number of occasions where for cleaners, you'll get a good employer who wants to do the right thing. They pay their workers more, they strike an agreement. A new competitor comes in, undercuts them, and they lose the contract. And there's a group of early childhood educators who I often refer to from Victoria, who were the pioneers really of multi-employer bargaining in Australia. They have got themselves now to 16% above the award. Now they had to go through a mile of red tape because the Act at the moment just makes multi-employer bargaining so difficult, but they did it. They got there. They're now 16% above the award. They're no longer eligible for the low paid or supported stream because they're no longer right at the bottom of a low award. They're now 16% above. Unless we have the single interest stream available, they effectively at the end of their current enterprise agreements will be on a pay freeze until they're low paid again, when they can then bargain, get ahead. So the theme with all of it, I guess, with all the bargaining issues is two things. One, we want to get wages moving, and we know the best way to do that has always been bargaining. The second thing that we know, though, is you can't get wages moving one company at a time if you're constantly facing the threat of being undercut on a race to the bottom on wages. That's effectively the reason why we've designed the legislation that we have. People in the low paid stream and the supported stream will effectively graduate so that on their next agreement, they'll be in the single interest stream so that people in a steady way get their wages moving ahead of the standard movements that otherwise happen in the award, and the employers get to be part of that negotiation too. That's the design. I know there's a million questions. I'm sorry if I've gone longer than was allotted to me, but hopefully that provides you a little bit more information as to what the government's trying to do here and why. Thanks for the opportunity to David.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Burke. Thank you, David. We'll move on with the question answers today. So let's start off with one that's right on top. Sure. Yeah. So the first question is, polling shows 27% of Aussies oppose the IR bill and only 14% oppose collective bargaining. Workers when small businesses are exempted. Who are you protecting?
Thank you, Mark, for the question. I hope I answered some of it in the earlier, and apologies for rushing through. I was really keen to get to Minister Burke and then get to questions. I know we are coming up on time, but we'll see how many we can get through. And just to correct, I think earlier I referred to Minister Burke as the what did I say? I think I said the Employment Education Minister. He is the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, as well as the Minister of the Arts. So just to correct the record on that one. Yeah, as I said earlier, I'm largely supportive of a lot of this legislation. The Senate committee process is still happening. There's more hearings next week. Some of the concerns being raised are around unions having a veto before this is put to a vote. The small business threshold is currently 15 headcount. Some, smaller cafes and us are saying, well, we've probably got 15 fairly regulars, on our books. Looking at a statutory review, lots of people are talking about improving the awards, which I know isn't in this bill, but that's something that's being talked about. And the boot is something that I think you hear a lot about. And if I can maybe pass to you on the second one to get your thoughts on the boot.
Is that working? Yes, great. So the question there on the boot goes to one of the issues that's emerged during the Senate inquiry, and it's why those processes are so important. And I referred to a little bit in my comment before. So the principle that we're determined to have is that no worker can be worse off. Now, some people, one of the academics and one of the organisations have put in a submission where they think they've found a way that potentially it could be gamed and there could be a pathway where if an agreement was designed along specific lines, some workers could still be worse off into the future. And so we're working through that in the department to work out what amendments are required to make sure that that's not true. So that question very much goes to the context of that evidence that's before the Senate committee. The determination from the government is really simple. We want the process of agreements being able to be registered and being able to go forward to be really simple and fair. And we want to make sure that the fear that's in that question is completely avoided and that there is no pathway that a worker could be worse off.
Thanks, Minister. So Ms. Burke does have to go soon, so we might go to from the floor, and then we'll crack on as we usually do, and you'll just have me to answer questions. There's one up the back, and then we'll come to you.
Oh. Thank you. I'm on a different subject. My name's Eleanor Gilbert.
You want to go? Minister, yeah. Come back to you.
I was going to say, my question is just exclusively to yourself. So if someone wants to ask a question to Minister Burke, maybe someone else should just go first.
Thank you very much. My name's Claire Dubé. Thank you, Dave, for continuing to hold these town halls. It's great to have them. My question, though, is to you, Tony, and thank you so much for coming along tonight. I'm not an IR lawyer, so I struggle to get my head around the complexity of all of this. So I really appreciate you coming to kind of explain it all. And it sounds like there's a lot in there that is hugely positive around, gender pay gap, focus on lower wage earners, and I really appreciate that. I guess my question, though, is if there's a whole lot that there seems to be from the media reports, a lot of support for, and just a few areas where there's still some questions about, is it not possible to, ensure that one part of the bill where there is that consensus is up now, and where there is that sort of, need I've heard from David, Jackie Lambie and others saying we need to talk about some aspects further. Couldn't that be delayed and have, urgent parts looked at now and other parts wait till next year so there's time for further consultation? Is that possible?
Thanks, Claire. I'm always wary there's a rule when you're a member of the House of Representatives that you never presume anything in the Senate. It's a very strict rule that I was taught by Penny Wong to never cross the line. So we're in the hands of the Senate in terms of any amendments that are made. But I have to say, the urgency I think is real. I really do. What's happening right now in terms of inflation and the figures that we're seeing and the extent to which people are going backwards and some of the decisions people are having to make aren't only hitting people on the lowest incomes. People on middle incomes will also have made financial commitments. They will now be having challenges in paying mortgages or paying rents. There is real price pressure on people now. And it's true that the day after the bill is carried, you don't get an immediate shift in wages. But you don't get a shift in wages for those people unless the legislation's passed. And the longer it takes, then the longer the starting point will be for people to get their wages moving. So my view is very much, I'm doing everything I can, and tonight is part of that, to try to help explain why each provision is there and why each provision is important. And if we can get to a point, and ideally hope we can, where as much as possible of this legislation, ideally all of it, can make its way through the Parliament of Australia and the start date happens this year on getting wages moving, then that's my preferred outcome. We still have time, but every moment for conversation, whether it's with Senator Dave Pocock or whether it's with other members of the crossbench, every conversation I can have, I'm having. There are lots of people facing these pressures right now with flatlining wages as prices are going up, who, if they thought I was taking my foot off the pedal because I didn't think it was urgent for them, they'd have some pretty colourful things to say about me. I feel there is an urgency here, and if there is any way of getting it through this year, I want to find it.
Thank you very much. My question is to you, Senator Pocock. On Monday, I was given the amazing opportunity to express my story as a baggage handler to the Senate inquiry on the IR bill, arguing why, in my view, this bill ought to be passed as soon as possible, so my employer, for example, can no longer race at bottom on pay and safety due to the woeful existing bargaining system, like taking away paid domestic violence leave we used to have. I'm curious, though, to understand how your own experience with the Players Union during your rugby career has shaped your dealings and perceptions of this bill.
That's a great question, and thank you for sharing your story. I really enjoyed seeing you at Albert Hall at the last town hall, so thanks for coming again. Yes, the Players Union was instrumental in I guess driving everything around our pay and conditions, and would hate to think what would have happened should we not have had that sort of representation. And it has shaped how I think about being able to have that collective voice and collective action. And part of why I'm so supportive of the majority of this bill, as I said earlier. And Ms. Burke said, there are details that I'm not across the line on. I'll continue to push on, continue to consult on. And as far as I'm concerned, the Senate committee hearing process is so valuable. The ones I've been involved in so far, you get access to experts, academics, all the peak groups, people like yourself who share your lived experience. And I really want to respect that process and see what comes out of it, and then go from there. So yes, it has shaped my views, and thanks for asking that. Okay, well, on the third one, I think I've answered that earlier. There are concerns I'm still working through around unions having to approve when workers and employers before that's put to a vote. There's also been some concerns raised with me if you have two unions involved in the process. One of them can say, this is great, we're fully supportive. One of them can say no, and it can't be put to a vote. So I think there's still some details to be worked out. As I said, small business, it's a 15 head count. The Senate committee is really looking at that and digging into, is that appropriate? I've heard everything from some of the unions wanting it from if you've got one employee, and we've heard some people saying it should be 200 employees. Clearly, I think it's going to be somewhere between those. So those are the sort of main concerns that we're busy working through. I'm really conscious of your time, so maybe one question, then we'll let you get on your way. Thank you. Who's got a mic?
Yes, hello. My name's Andrew Dane. If I could, Minister Burke, this is partially directed at you, but I would be interested to hear, Senator, your opinion as well. It was wonderful to hear. Can you see me? You said the concept that if there's a consequence, then employers are more likely to do the right thing, which I think is a fantastic principle to raise. I'm a teacher in an independent Christian school. We're part of a multi-enterprise agreement with 3 different centres. And it's not we would want to strike necessarily if things didn't go the way that we were looking for. But when we're in a situation where our employers are bargaining together and indeed are taking their lead from schools within New South Wales as well, I guess it would be good to know that there were consequences that would encourage them to make those right choices. Like I say, it's not that we're wanting to strike, but there's a consequence there. At the moment, we're prevented from striking because of the MEA.
In terms of industrial action, we're not changing the rules for industrial action here. And what we're actually doing with multi-employer bargaining is making the rules for industrial action on multi-employer bargain exactly the same as what they would be if you were negotiating with a single employer. So on industrial action, and there has been a number of people wanting me to make significant shifts. There have been some some scare campaigns pretending I've made major shifts, but if you actually look at the legislation, the rules for industrial action haven't been changed. And I respect that there are some strong arguments saying they should be, but we haven't changed them in this bill.
Just quickly, thanks, Senator Pocock. Just a quick question from myself. My name's Rishi. My question is just more relating to a homeowner. There's no question that the race crisis and the land tax in Canberra is quite high. I was just sort of wondering, from your perspective, I guess, is it fair to be taxed give the land tax as much as we do in ACT compared to New South Wales and other states where it's actually abolished? And then my second question more relates to specifically the rates for the rates being taxed to mixed unit blocks. So sort of what I mean by that is we were sort of forced to pay by the ACT Revenue Office. We were forced to pay a commercial rate for 70% of 70% of our property, which was valued as a residential, and then 30% at the bottom was actually a business, but they taxed us at 100% commercial. What happened was we actually got a refund from the Revenue Office because we sent a complaint, and then legislation was that that particular house shouldn't have been taxed at 100% commercial. So I was just wondering, like, from a revenue perspective, how can we sort of rectify that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thanks for the question. If you come in February, I'll bring Andrew Barr to the next town hall and he can answer your ACT rates questions. I mean, I'm really, I don't think this is something that I'm going to get into. I'm very happy to talk later about this if you want me to raise the concern. My understanding is that they've moved to this as a more progressive tax system, but we certainly do hear concerns about rates and services in Canberra. Again, very much a territory issue, but if you hang around afterwards, I'd love to chat more. I'm really conscious of time, so if anyone has a burning question for Minister Burke, we'll go to you, and then we'll let him head off. Everyone. Sure. I'm happy to answer. Does anyone have a question for Minister Burke before he or is that for him? That's for me. Okay. Peter?
Tony, what protection is there for employees? Should management or a supervisor tell you to disregard a safety?
To disregard a safety law?
Yes, exactly. Because before I took redundancy, I was working in Sydney for the power company, and the supervisor told us to disregard breakaway protection on trailers. So I raised it with the relevant authorities, and they knew that I was the one that raised it, and that's what one of the reasons why they wanted to take redundancy.
Right. Well, that should amount to an unfair dismissal, and potentially to a constructive dismissal. So I don't know how long ago this happened, but ultimately, legally, you must not be disadvantaged for having raised a safety issue. Critically important that happens. Now, we know in reality, people with less secure jobs are less willing to raise safety issues because people often fear exactly what you've just described. It's one of the benefits of people having more security at work is in fact get a safety outcome from that as well, because people have confidence that they can speak up. But the essential rule is you should never be disadvantaged for raising a safety issue. There are countries of the world where that would happen routinely, and Australia should not be one of them. Okay.
Well, Tony, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If on that note, if we could just give Minister Tony Burke a round of applause. Really appreciate you taking the time, come out to Gungala. Thank you. Okay, well, let's, what time were we meant to? Okay, we were meant to end at 7:30, so please, if you want or need to leave, no judgment. Get up and head off, but I'm happy to keep going. So okay, so the question was, what negotiations have I had with ACTU? I've had many discussions with Cheryl O'Neill and Sally McManus. They clearly just want this to pass as is, that they've had a lot of input and are really happy with the bill. I've raised these concerns. The thing I'm telling to everyone, I'm not in there to be a rubber stamp. I'm listening. I'm engaged in the Senate committee process. I'm talking to people across the ACT, and I think when independents do that, I think we ultimately end up with better legislation. So that's. I mean, they've been very respectful. We've certainly had, I don't know how many emails now from their campaigns, lots. But yeah, that's what they're trying to get through at the moment. Who's got the?
Hi, listen, my name's Helen Piggott, and I just want to give an opinion on some of this and a bit of an insight, and then have a question. I've been living in Canberra for 22 years. I've worked at the hospital as a cleaner for 10.5 years. My husband's in the same industry, not at the hospital, but in the same industry. My workplace has been involved in enterprise brain for the past 11 months, and we're just after parity for the cleaners in our industry, because the system is currently designed to support companies undercutting wages. So if the contract goes, the next person comes in, they can go, well, we're only going to do it at this because they've gone in with a cheaper price. The cost of living is just sky high in Canberra, as everyone knows, but I've got colleagues who are living in caravan parks, like they're working flat out all day, every day cleaning at the hospital. But they're living in caravan parks, some of them. Some of them we've got 2 and 3 families living in a home together, because that's the only way they can afford to live here, because the wages aren't keeping up. I've got one lady who let me know on Friday that she's surviving on $65 to pay for her groceries for a fortnight. And I just think it's appalling. And our industry is predominantly women and visa migrant workers. And we've been thanked a lot throughout the pandemic, but that's not putting food on our table and paying our bills. And we need the multi-employment bargaining to stop the pay stagnating and going backwards, and for everyone to come together in the industry, in the cleaning industry, so that we are all getting that fair go. It's just not good enough. It's so important to us. If a contract goes and another one comes in, they can undercut things. They can do what they like at the moment. People take the lowest cut. They don't always take the highest cut. So we're really desperate. We are desperate. We are getting to the point, people were complaining they couldn't survive on $1,500 a fortnight with the JobKeeper. We're basically on that now anyway. That's our life. Whether we like it or lump it, we're on just over $1,500 if you're on day shift doing 5 days a week. So it's getting desperate. We've been negotiating for 11 months now, and it's just dragging and dragging and dragging. It can't go on. And it's not just us. It's like all the low income industries. There's a lot of women in those industries and a lot of migrant people in those industries. So, we voted for something different, and we're just hoping that you are going to do something different and do this change so that we can be right.
Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight. I mean, I've made it very clear that I support both the supported and the low income stream. Very supportive of it. I've told Mr. Burke it would pass on Monday. I'm really keen to get the other details in this bill right. And I think one of the things that you've touched on, which I've really been pushing the government on, is housing. Clearly, getting wages going is just part of it. The cost of housing in the ACT is something that we have to start to deal with. We've got to have a serious conversation about housing in Australia, starting with what is housing for? Is housing just something that we invest in, or is this a human right where everyone in our community can and should have a safe roof over their head? And I'll continue to do that. I'm pushing them on the Housing Australia Future Fund to get that into the open soon. So you know, community housing groups and experts can start to have a look on it, so we can begin to, one, build more social and affordable housing in Australia, but continue the conversation when it comes to housing. So thank you very much. I do hear what you're saying, and I'm very supportive of that. I've made it very clear to the minister about that. Okay, so we'll go to media ownership and diversity. I think clearly a big issue in Australia, and something that Australians want to see more of a focus on. We had half a million Australians put their name to calling for a royal commission. Zoe Daniel in the lower house is doing some really good work on this. She's been pushing the government to get an inquiry into media diversity. We look around the world, and you can see in the democracies that are really working and have more cohesion across society, they have a real emphasis on media diversity, both in terms of ownership, but then also having smaller media outlets through regional areas in smaller towns, providing people with news. Clearly something that we need to be looking on, and something that I'm supportive of. And I've had a number of discussions with Zoe Daniel about this. We heard about the MEA earlier. Talked about splitting the bill. I mean, job seeker, it has to go up. 1 in 6 children in Australia growing up in poverty. That's going to have huge implications, obviously for them, but for all Australians. This is something that we can and must fix. Before the election, a lot of people who are now in government, members of the Labor Party, were railing about the coalition not raising job seeker. Now they're in government, that this is now their problem. They need to raise it. I'll continue to raise it with all various ministers, and continue to talk about it in the Senate. ACOS and ACCOS do such important work in this area, and it's clear there's so many people across the ACT doing it tough. So the top one is, and a lot of people have said this to me, if you don't pass it soon, then big business is going to run a campaign and the bill will be lost. Labor only needs 1 extra vote. The Greens have said that they'll support it. And I've said to them, I'm committed to working constructively. I want to work through these issues that I have with the bill. I'm not going to be swayed by a big business campaign. That is not my concern. The concerns I raised earlier were around some of the union veto powers on this, and then how it will potentially impact small business, and ensuring that we're getting those parts of it right. We'll go up to I don't think it's on. Yeah, go. I'll just relay the question. Sure. So a question about climate change, what can be done in the ACT? I think one of the problems with climate change, global warming, is it feels like it's such a big thing that we just can't do anything about at a local level. But when you look at a household, so many of the decisions that are made in a household have a huge effect on emission when that's scaled across a community and across a country. And we're in this situation now where we've got a cost of living crisis, we've got inflation going through the roof, and the climate crisis is worsening. And yet one of the solutions, electrifying our households, can help deal with cost of living. There's some really good studies showing that if you can help households fully electrify, that household will save $3,000 to $5,000 every year, which is it's a huge saving year on year. And the other thing we're seeing is that if you invest in renewables, you're essentially locking in the price of electricity going forward. So it's anti-inflationary. We can see at the moment, one of the big drivers of inflation are electricity prices, which is due to the war in Ukraine. Whereas if you have your renewables, your rooftop solar and a battery and an EV, you've essentially flatlined the cost of electricity. So we've been working with a number of people, Saul Griffith, who was working in the US on the Inflation Reduction Act. He's an Australian inventor. He's now back here. We've got an event with him on Thursday in Parliament House to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, to talk about the opportunity for Australia and the opportunity for households to be saving money. The thing that experts like Saul are saying is this transition is happening whether we do anything or not. It's going to happen over the next decade or so. The opportunity is to bring that forward and help households electrify. Currently, it's more expensive to go electric. EVs are still more expensive, but those costs are coming down. But if you can help people with cheap finance, interest-free finance, that then means that your EV is paying for itself because you're not having to put $100 a week of petrol or diesel. So I think it's a really exciting story. We've got a Suburb Zero policy working group. Where is Sarah? I don't know if she's here. Right up the back, there's the amazing Sarah. Have a chat to her after this if you're interested in what's happening. I think it's very exciting. I think it's a huge opportunity. The ACT government's obviously made a big start on this, but I think the ACT is a great place to show Australia what can be done in this space. I'll go to a couple up here. Just the top one here quickly. So alcohol advertising in sport. Advertising is something that we get a lot of questions about, whether it's alcohol or gambling, something that people in our community want to be dealt with. We're looking at options. We're talking to the government. I think this issue isn't going away. We're going to see more and more people calling for it. It is clearly an issue. Sorry, sir.
G'day, Senator. My name's Ben. I'm an Australian
Hey, Ben.
seafarer. You've probably all seen over the news over the last couple of days about Svitzer closing
Yes.
the ports, locking out its workforce. Svitzer are a multinational company that pays almost no tax in Australia. They're trying to slash wages by 47% and casualise its workforce. Other companies like Qantas have tried this tactic before. They can do this because broken workplace laws that allow companies to terminate their agreements with workers and toss them back on the basic award. Will you commit to supporting the new workplace laws that will prevent manipulation and abuse by bosses and companies like Svitzer?
Thank you for the question, and thanks for coming along. As I said, I'm supportive of the vast majority of the measures in this IR omnibus bill. There's a lot of things happening in here. I'm not there yet, and the Senate committee hearings are still ongoing. So my commitment is to continue to consult, to continue to work with the minister to sort this out. We clearly don't want that happening to Australian workers, but I'm really committed to ensuring that we get good legislation. So at this point, I can't say yes, but I think hopefully you've heard tonight that I'm committed to, ensuring that we do get wages moving, but we've got to get this right. This is huge change that's going to have big implications for, potentially millions of workers and lots of, businesses across the country. Thank you. Yes.
Hi. My name's Eleanor Gilbert, and I'd like to just change tack a bit and come in behind Uncle Richie and all what his people and First Nations here stand for. And I pay my respects to all people who've gone before us and the owners of the country. But the most important law in the world is the law against genocide, because genocide is the worst crime in the world. And most people don't realise Australia does not have a law against genocide, even now. So Everett, back in 1948, with the Polish jurist Lemkin, pushed the ratification of the Genocide Convention forward, got ratified. And even today, we don't have a law against genocide. So it's a big, long story. But when the Rome Statute was going through and Australia wanted to join the International Criminal Court, a team of us had done a lot of work on all of this. 2 countries said, no, you can't join because you don't have a law against genocide. So they rushed through the International Criminal Court Consequential Amendments Act in 2002, which is part of the Criminal Code 1995. So they brought in war crimes, crimes against the peace, the Genocide Convention. Everyone thought, great, that's great. But when you look at it, clauses 268121, 268122 of the Genocide Convention, when they brought that in, there's an Attorney General's fiat. So only the Attorney General can take a case of genocide. And if he says, no, you've got no right of appeal, none of the writs, anything. And that's totally against the convention because it's the worst crime in the world. It comes under Jus Cogens and erga omnes, all these things. It's an international crime. Anyone should be able to start a case in any court of the world. And we don't have that. And when Whitlam, he gave the first Vincent Lingiari memorial lecture called Dragging the Chain, he drew attention to this. And we still haven't got it. And
Okay, I did not know that. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. We'll certainly look into it and raise it with the Attorney General.
So I wrote to you about it, and it's on your email. But we also hand-delivered this letter to Anthony Albanese at his town hall meeting in Marrickville recently. And we've also working with the Greens on it. So just to let you know.
Okay, sounds like you got it covered then.
You can, well, if you would join, but people just don't realise how dreadful. And if we have a law against genocide, they can't do what they're doing to Aboriginal kids, and they can't keep taking the kids and all these other things that go on against First Nations people. So Uncle Richie and everyone, with you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, David, I'm here. Hey, my name's Lucas, and I worked at Woolworths for 9 years. And during the time that I worked at Woolworths, I was underpaid versus the award. And I was underpaid by about $3,500 a year. And it was only because of the boot existing that I was able to get the award enforced and a new agreement approved that meant that my pay was in line with the award. So I guess my question is to you, is the boot something that you are strongly considering opposing changes to? Because it's the safety net that I guess protects the lowest paid workers from going beneath the award. And for me, it's just by far the most important aspect of the IR bill that needs to not be changed. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for your question and sharing your story. My understanding is the boot is being simplified so that it achieves exactly that. But as Mr. Burke said in his response to one of those questions, one of the things that has been raised by Refu and a few other people is that there are potentially loopholes, and I think that's the value of this Senate committee process. So we'll be looking at that. We were asking them questions on Friday. Unfortunately, I talked about this being a really tight timeline. What's been happening at the Senate committee hearings? What usually happens is that, say, a union or employer group will put in their submission. You get to read through it, highlight a few things, and then they appear before the committee and you ask them questions. Almost every group that we have had in front of the committee has either not had a chance to put in a submission or has sent it through literally 10 minutes before, half an hour before. So you're literally sitting there trying to flick through 20, 30 pages to ask questions. It hasn't been ideal. So we're now going through all those submissions, but clearly it's such an important safeguard. And I'm sorry that happened, but great to hear a real life example of that. And clearly we have to get it. And I think there's broad consensus out there that that's its role, is to ensure those sorts of situations don't happen. Thank you.
Hi, I realise that you're an independent, which I think is a good thing in the nature of this question. So first thing I want to talk to you about is what Tony Burke was talking about, which is that real wages haven't increased. And I think the thing that I've been watching very carefully is that no matter what happens here, you've got 123% of GDP in household debt in Australia. That's amongst the highest in the developed world. I think we're only second to Finland, or I think it's Switzerland. So when interest rates are rising, this is a much bigger threat to this country than any of the other developed countries on the planet. And so I guess the question is, why are wages not rising? And one of the things is that monetary policy looks at full employment. And so that's the trigger. That's the natural sort of free market equivalent of a sort of safety valve. So, when full employment gets to about 4%, that's where it was supposed to be. Wages were supposed to rise. Wages didn't rise. So what did they do? They turned around and refocused it and said, well, maybe that's not full employment. Maybe full employment is 3.5%. We got to 3.5%. Wages didn't rise. So the canary in the coal mine here is essentially saying what's different about us compared to their model that they've been using for the last 20 or so years, industrial relations. And one of the big concerns here is the Reserve Bank themselves have been trying to push the government for many, many years to say we need real wages to rise. Because if real wages don't rise, people cannot pay off the debt. And with debt at 120% of GDP, that's basically a ticking time bomb for this country. So I do realise you want to do your due diligence, but the thing is that for you, what he's essentially saying is the free market has failed. The Reserve Bank is admitting that it's failed by saying that full employment is not triggering wage rises. So something has to be done, regardless as to what political persuasion you're in. Monetary policy has failed. And the Reserve Bank itself, and that's amazing itself, is essentially pushing for wage rises. So what's your sort of strategy here in regards to when you're faced with that sort of, I guess, risk to the country's economic future?
Thank you. I think, yeah, really, really well put. And as I think I keep trying to make clear, we absolutely need wages to move. People are feeling the pinch. We are in a cost of living crisis. And as you said, mortgage repayments going up by the month at the moment. So this is urgent. This legislation is not before the Senate yet. So I know there's been a massive campaign and people saying that I'm holding this up, but the reality is that if I wanted to vote for it, I couldn't at the moment. There's still a Senate committee process unfolding. We don't know when it'll be before the Senate. My commitment has been, there are a whole bunch of parts of this bill that will start to do that. We'll get wages going. And I've said I'll back them in 100%. Put them to the Senate. They've got my vote. It's the details of this bill and ensuring that we get it right, that it is a good piece of legislation, isn't going to have unintended consequences. Now, we were contacted with a real life example where a group of workers had been bargaining, and they talked us through the EBA that they'd managed to negotiate. Super impressive, like to the point where one of the unions had written this glowing endorsement saying, this is a huge step forward for workers. We fully endorse it. Another union involved said, not good enough. We do not endorse this agreement. Under this proposed bill, those workers can then not vote on that legislation. They have to continue to bargain, because just any one union involved has veto power, even if they're not a member of that union. That, for example, is something that I'm concerned about. It doesn't make sense to me. If the workers and employees are happy and they want it to go to a vote, I think it should be able to go to vote so they can get that agreement done. So it's those sorts of details that I'll continue to work with the government on over the next few weeks. We might, I'm conscious of time. I don't know how maybe I'll do one up here and then one last question from the floor. Where are we up to? So COVID, clearly still an issue. I see people wearing masks. My thoughts are we need to continue to listen to the experts. There have been concerns raised about long COVID. There's one of the committees is looking at long COVID in the lower house, looking at what needs to be done, what's the long-term effect, and the government has committed to establishing a Centre for Disease Control going forward, which will hopefully start to bring in a lot of this expertise. One of the things I found really interesting during the Senate estimates is Australia's committed to spending 5% of our health budget on preventative health by 2030, which I think most people would agree is a great thing. We want to be focusing on prevention rather than the cure where we can. But as part of it, we're counting a lot of COVID measures, so it's really distorted at the moment. So I think COVID is something that we're going to have to continue to deal with, but ensure that we're looking after people in our community who maybe don't fall within the average Australian that I think a lot of the health advice is for. Clearly, there's people with different needs in our community, and I'd hope that we're all respectful of that and continue to listen to the advice, and that politicians listen to that advice rather than politicizing it. Last. Oh. Uh-huh. Okay. Mhm. Okay. Lack of clarity. Okay. Well, we can certainly follow that up and chase it up with, I guess, the health minister, and maybe try and get the chief medical officer was at Senate estimates last week for days getting grilled about this stuff. So we can definitely get in touch and we'll relay that about the lack of clarity and people in the community wanting to know, exactly when we should have access to it and why we don't, if that's the case. Is that all right? Anyone else with the mic? Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
First of all, I wanted just to commend you for involving community in these kind of conversations. It's exceptional to know that we have a space to actually feedback how we're feeling in the community.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming.
I work for the Australian Red Cross and represent the ACT. So I'd love to get your contact details because that was exceptional to listen to you being all about laws of war for working for the Australian Red Cross. We're auxiliary government in times of emergency. So also the questions about climate change, we're really interested in sitting down with you and having conversations further about that from a national perspective as well. What I also wanted to bring to your attention, as homelessness has been raised lots of times during tonight, which is definitely on the top of our radar, noting barriers that we're seeing, particularly in the ACT, but also nationally, the incredible housing crisis. And I say crisis, and I mean crisis. The other really important factor that I'd like to discuss in regards to the ACT specifically is our child youth protective services. That really needs to be looked into. We have an incredible program, the Birth Family Advocacy Support Service, which is assisting birth parents who are engaged with the system. I really feel that we'd need to do more in that space. There's actually no governing body that oversees the conduct and what goes on. It's very, very difficult for families to make complaints and have information in regards to those complaints. So I just wanted to flag that with you and also know if you've looked into that space within the ACT, noting that First Nations children are overrepresented in that space.
Well, firstly, thank you for the amazing work that you do at the Red Cross, and thank you for raising those issues. I agree. It is a housing crisis, and I think across Australia, people love to talk about Canberra having the highest medium income and all that stuff, but it just glosses over all these massive issues here. So we'd love to chat more about that. It's something that's been raised. Clearly, it's sort of ACT government issue, but certainly I'd love to chat to you after this and see if there's anything I can do to help with that, if that's all right. I'm really, it's after 8 now. I really appreciate you all coming tonight. Thank you for your time. If you want to hang around, I'll hang around to chat, or just see someone in a Team Pocock t-shirt. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you've got a bit out of this. If you have any suggestions or would like to see it run differently, get in touch. Well, we're always open to feedback. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Can I thank Sushmita and the team, the amazing team who've organised today. Thank you very much. They never